The door is opening. Rachel Reeves is standing outside number 11 Downing Street. She's walked out with that iconic red box. She's standing amongst her Treasury ministers. We have Dan Tomlinson. She's standing forward next to James Murray. Torsten Bell there too, of course. And she's showing the world's media that iconic red box. Now, of course, it is not the same red box as it was when it was first made. That was in 1860 for William Gladstone. That is not the same red box as that. Now, I'm just going to do my shout here, James.
Come on.
Chancellor, is this budget about your own survival? Will it be your last?
I think she flinched. She flinched.
That's almost her answering, James.
To break the cycle of austerity, we need a fair and a sustainable tax system. One that generates revenues to fund the public services that we all use and supports investment to grow our economy. That does mean that today I am asking everyone to make a contribution. The previous Conservative government froze personal tax thresholds from 2021 to 2028. And today I will maintain all income tax and equivalent national insurance thresholds at their current level for a further 3 years from 2028. We are ramping up sanctions on Russia, and we are freezing known Russian assets. But let me be clear, I don't actually mean the honourable member for Clacton. And so because I am tackling fraud and error in our welfare system, because I am cracking down on tax avoidance, because I am reforming gambling taxation, I can announce today, fully costed and fully funded, the removal of the two-child limit in full from April.
And may I congratulate the Right Honourable Lady on delivering her second budget. I hope she enjoyed it, because it really should be her last. What a total humiliation. It's a total humiliation, Madam Deputy Speaker. Last year, she put up taxes by £40 billion, the biggest tax raid in British history. She promised that she wouldn't be back for more. She swore it was a one-off. She told everyone that from now on, it would be stability and she would pay for everything with growth. Today, she has broken every single one of those promises. If she had any decency, she would resign.
Lewis, hit me with it. What did you think of that?
Well, look, I think that if we're thinking about the political effects, first of all, before we get onto the economic ones, I think politically it will probably have done something to shore up Rachel Reeves and Keir Starmer internally, in terms of their internal position in the Labour Party, whilst not doing much and potentially being even deleterious to their external position in the country and with the electorate. Because we knew that going into this budget, that one of the biggest audiences, and it always will be an audience, but it was an even more important than for a typical Chancellor to please the people sitting behind her. Not just the people out in the country who are watching it and listening to what we think about it, but the people, the 400 or so Labour MPs who are sitting behind it. Because the mood, as we know, has been sulphurous among Labour MPs. And so I was texting a Labour MP who I think is a reasonably good approximation for the sort of barometer or political barometer of the party. And I said to them, what do you think? And the first thing they'd come back with, in fact, the only thing, she just lifted 500,000 kids out of child poverty. Obviously, that's a valuable thing to do. It's a really important thing to do. The two-child benefit cap, you can make a very strong moral argument to the country, as the Chancellor did, that it was pernicious and it was wrong and it was having all sorts of terrible outcomes on the poorest children. Nonetheless, we know that politically it was popular. And then it is a difficult political argument, I think, doing that at the same time as welfare spending overall rocketing in a spiralling and uncontrolled way.
16 billion.
Well, 16 to 18 billion, higher than even the OBR thought back in March. Something in terms of welfare reform, of course, from which the government has resiled. And at the same time, doing that at the same time as you are making one of the biggest tax grabs, long-term tax grabs, in British political histories, which is what we are seeing with the income tax threshold freeze, something that didn't start with Rachel Reeves, but something that Rachel Reeves is expanding and consolidating and embedding into the tax.
And that welfare bill, worth saying, takes in the state pension, but it also takes in those millions of people who could be working and aren't working for a number of reasons, including sickness. The former Chancellor Jeremy Hunt making the point that if we got back to even just pre-pandemic levels of in-work welfare, you'd save almost 50 billion.
If I were a Labour MP, I would be worried that the Labour Party is going to become known as the welfare party. And that is always a danger for Labour governments, but it is not one that this government has done anything potentially to correct, given we know the overall context of rising welfare spending. And just to dwell for a second, just economically as well, on this question of fiscal drag, which I think is really, really important. The changes in income tax thresholds, they don't sound as sexy or as exciting as changes to the actual rates, which is why the Chancellor has chosen to do it in the way that she has. But the effect is tantamount to income tax increases, substantial income tax increases for many millions of people.
It brings in almost the same amount.
Almost the same amount. And, you don't have to go back that far. For example, if you look at the number of people in the country, the percentage of workers in the country who are paying the higher rate of tax, go back 10 years ago, 2015, it was about 8 or 9% of the workforce. By the end of this decade, that is going to go up to 20% of the workforce. When the higher income tax rate was introduced back by Nigel Lawson in 1987, or it was introduced at the current level of 40p in the pound, only about 3% of the total workforce were paying it. As I say, that's going to be 20% by the end of this decade. It is one of the biggest and most profound changes to our tax system that we have ever seen. And it started, as I say, under the Conservatives, but it's being extended under Labour.
Andy, I didn't know there was such a thing as synchronised jaw-dropping. But we were sitting here together in the studio watching the pre-budget coverage when suddenly the fact that virtually the entire budget had been leaked ahead of time emerged.
Well, we had been discussing how leaky this process had been before we got the leak to end all leaks.
Exactly.
Which is the whole shebang.
Was there? Before
the Chancellor had even taken the stage. I mean, there cannot have been a more dramatic run-up to a budget ever, Andrew, than that one, I think.
Well, I think we both remember at least the story of Hugh Dalton stopping and leaking, just a phrase from one aspect of one budget very briefly to one journalist who published it a little bit early, and he had to resign as Chancellor at the time. And we all thought perhaps that the Chancellor is going to have to go herself.
As it turned out, it looks to be on the OBR rather than on the Treasury.
And she made that very clear, didn't she?
The Chancellor was very clear about that early on. The word "there" was used with intonation in the first 30 seconds.
She sounded properly angry, I thought.
And rightly so. This is totally beyond the pale. You saw the gyrations in financial markets. That's real money being won and lost. This is market manipulation.
So there'll be people out there who are a lot richer and people out there who are a lot poorer because of that leak.
Quite so. And there will have to be, I think, some pretty drains-up inquiry about what has gone wrong, because this is not the way to carry out any policy process.
I don't wish anybody ill, but I suspect by the end of play today we may see a resignation around this.
I fear as much. It looks like a technical error. They can happen, but ultimately there should be some accountability for something that's been that damaging, not just to financial markets, but to the credibility of the whole process, Andrew.
Let's turn to the budget itself then, Andy, which is the sort of still small voice at the centre of all of this political mayhem. And actually a relatively good budget in many ways. I think the markets in the end quite liked it.
Yeah, we've had the gyration, but where markets appear to have landed for the moment is as you were. They've taken it in their stride. They were one of the stakeholders. The other were the backbenchers. They seem to like it, certainly the lifting the two-child cap. So in terms of the key stakeholders and some of the measures, I would say, again, a bad hand played today pretty adroitly by the Chancellor.
We should just also point out that just before she stood up, she was sitting there on the front bench. Somebody passed her a phone which said, "Your entire budget has just been leaked, Chancellor." And you could see her face fall. An absolute nightmare for her to get up and then deliver a budget with a certain amount of gusto and energy and self-confidence was in itself impressive, I thought.
I agree with that. And I think the Chancellor warmed into the budget speech as well. Not surprised when you're shocked from like that. Imagine the signature moment of your year, perhaps of your career, and you're told the contents are appearing on the screen before you've spoken. I mean, I thought she lent into that very well in the circumstances.
Broadly speaking, she's raising about twice as much more in tax as she's spending.
That's right.
In extra spending.
That's right. And that's the positive way of putting that, is that she's created for herself some extra wiggle room, some extra headroom, which financial markets in particular were very keen on, so that we're not back to this pantomime again 12 months from now, Andrew.
One of the things that's exercised you before we get into more of the detail is the announcement as a kind of fait accompli of how digital ID will be used. Your reaction is, well, so we're having it, are we?
Well, it's £1.8 billion is what's in the numbers in the OBR report. £1.8 billion for digital ID, for which there is no electoral mandate. There's nothing in the manifesto. Nobody wants it. It's incredibly unpopular in the country. They are getting that £1.8 billion from the Home Office budget, which they've already frozen in real terms, and they're adding no new budget to it, which means they are literally, this government is taking money away from border control, i.e. the Home Office budget, in order to spend money on digital ID, which supposedly was meant to help with border control. You couldn't make it up. And obviously we've had the leakiest budget in history, which has culminated in an enormous leak, quite fittingly. It's an omnishambles budget from an omnishambles chancellor.
Would you expect a resignation from the OBR about this?
I mean, that's the least of what we'd expect. We need Rachel Reeves' resignation.
Why?
Forget about the OBR.
The only thing I didn't hear from him was an explanation about Nathan Gill and the guy, I think it was, who took money from the Russians, I believe it was. I didn't hear him talking about that when it came in, but maybe that's because his leader's embroiled in a racism.
It's funny, someone from the SNP turning up here to talk about corruption. That takes quite a lot of gall.
We've already covered that. We've already
covered it. I've never met Nathan Gill. The first time I read his name was in the newspaper with regard to this case. It's ancient history.
It's not ancient history.
For you to try to besmirch the millions of people in this country who support reform and support Nigel shows that you've got no idea.
No, mate, that is why we have gained on you so much in Scotland. You can't
and your
pretend this hasn't
incompetent reign in
happened.
Scotland is going to shortly come to an end.
You cannot pretend this hasn't happened. A man who was the leader of the Reform Party in Wales is now in jail.
Questions. I've already
for working.
Sorry,
for
he was not leader of the Reform Party.
For working for.
He was not leader of the Reform
Party. What was
Party.
his position in the Reform Party?
He was the head of Wales for about 43 days when Reform was polling at about 1%.
Taking a step back, the politics of this budget. Tax rises. This is a tax bonanza of the likes that we have never really seen. Even the Office for Budget Responsibility say this is the third largest increase in tax for the OBR on record. So since 2010, only two other budgets would raise tax by more of a percentage take from
that. One of them last year.
Exactly. Exactly. And I think there will be a discussion by the end of the day, Sheila, about really, obviously, Rachel Reeves not breaking the actual letter of that manifesto in terms of those increase in income tax, VAT, national insurance. But is she breaking the spirit of the manifesto? Is she breaking what she said she wasn't going to do, what Keir Starmer repeatedly said he wasn't going to do, raise taxes on working people? And was that promise worth making that or not?
Answer to your question, yes. She is breaking the spirit of the manifesto quite clearly. But if you say what matters to her most, and you heard her getting very, very emotional, actually she did really well, I thought, today. When she was sitting there on the front bench, somebody passed her a phone which showed that her entire budget had just been leaked.
I noticed that just before.
And you could see the expression on her face.
She briefly shook her head, didn't she? Yeah.
And to get up with the entire chamber roaring derision at her and deliver that budget so confidently, I thought was a great achievement.
I also thought, you talked about her saying this is a Labour budget, budget, but she also said, didn't she, my choices. She took full responsibility for this because she knows the knives are out.
They really are out for her and for Keir Starmer. But around the whole child poverty part of the budget, I thought you really heard her own emotion coming through. Yeah. Asking herself, no doubt after some very, very hard days in the mirror, what am I doing this for? Why am I in politics? And I thought you could tell from the chamber, she's in politics for issues around child poverty and the poorest of the poor. That's what she thinks being Chancellor is really about.
It's really interesting because that I noticed that too. And Natasha, just speak to us for a minute on, and we will get into the detail of how this affects people's money. Obviously, that's a massive part of what we're going to talk about for the next 2 hours. But the politics of this is the emotion that we saw there when she talked about child poverty, when she talked about her school and the sort of the the commitment she wanted to give to children living in poverty in particular. The emotion and the feeling around politics, it matters, doesn't it? How you make people feel in politics is really important.
Yeah, and, if you looked at MPs on the backbenches and what they were delighted to hear from the Chancellor in the budget, the only real measure that got them all waving their little papers was the lifting of the two-child benefit cap. We have heard time and time again on LBC from MPs who have absolutely demanded it above nothing else. And Rachel Reeves's budget today was obviously not just about those Labour MPs. It's about Labour MPs, it's about the public, it's about so many different types of groups. But for Labour MPs, this was a really, really important part of her message to them, because there needs to be something to quieten that chatter in the Labour Party about her position and the Prime Minister's position. However, you heard that just from Kemi Badenoch. The opposition are going to seize on this. You heard her talk about this as a giveaway for Benefit Street. And actually looking at some of the detail in the OBR, it is a huge cash bung for some people who are on benefits, an average of £5,000 a year given to around 500,000 people who are on benefits. And there are some people out there who will say, that's not fair.
Well, we should remind ourselves that although the lifting a two-child benefit cap is very popular in the Labour Party, it is not popular out in the country. There is a majority against this because people think, why should I be paying for, quotes, feckless, quotes, people who have more children than I would have?
The real gaslighting, if I'm going to use a sort of modern-day term, the real gaslighting was Labour at the last election saying, don't worry about that, no need to worry about that, we will grow the economy sufficiently to get out of it, or we just won't do it. And they when pushed about, well, you're going to have to raise taxes then. No, we're not going to do that either. And here we are, budget number 2. We've got another enormous increase in taxes, with the all the sort of the left-wing think tanks saying this isn't going to increase living standards, with no growth on the horizon at all that the OBR can lay their hands on. This is not. If this is a good job, I'd hate to see a bad job.
There's not really much point me saying, should you be paying more tax? Because most people are going to say no. And more people than we realise are going to say yes, as we occasionally manage to prove on this programme. Voices that are heard pretty much nowhere else in the British media. Should you be paying a little bit more tax? Yes, I should, actually. Should you be paying a mansion tax on your £2.5 million house? Well, I'd rather not, because, I could spend the money on sweets. But obviously, in the great scheme of things, when I think about the state of the country and what has been done to it, and I managed to tamp down the fact that the things that were done to this country were largely done by people on the other side of the political divide, most obviously austerity and Brexit, then I accept that, yes, I should probably be putting my shoulder to the wheel, because if I don't, who will? They are perhaps the most ignored voices. Those of us who recognise that we need to put our shoulder even harder to the wheel for no reason other than that we can. That's it. That's the only reason why it's you. Because you can.
I'm a fairly moderate person. I have a view. I don't get overly excited about things, but I tell you what, I've had enough of this government now. Sick of them.
What is it that's the straw on the back of the camel?
The run-up to this budget, I think, amongst everything else. I support Labour. I voted for Labour. I look at a Labour government now, and I do not know what this is and what they're trying to achieve or what the direction is. They've come in on an agenda of 2 main things, change and growth.
Yep.
And she's come in and she said, we're not going to go back to austerity, so that means no cuts. I'm not going to bend the fiscal rules. I'm not going to borrow more. And we're not going to raise your key taxes. But if the first budget doesn't go so well, which it hasn't, which I'll come back to, she needs to find money somewhere. If she's not going to do cuts or bend the fiscal rules and borrow, tax is all she's got. And she comes in on budget 1, desperate for economic growth, and the first budget is inflationary. The national insurance and the minimum wage at the same time, it's inflationary. She comes back this year, minimum wage for a second time. She needs to find some money. We know she wants to raise income tax. A party says, no, you don't, just like they did with welfare reforms. You're not doing that. So she's going to extend the freeze on the thresholds.
Let me ask you this. Do you think the fact that she's tried to make... How much sympathy do you have for the fact that she has tried to make those welfare cuts and effectively she's been bullied out of it by her own party? Simon?
Well, I think that shows the fragility of... So they come in with a very, very massive majority. But actually, when you look at the picture, not that much percentage overall compared to previous landslides. So they're not. They should be with that majority in a position where they can pass any legislation they want. But they're absolutely not. They're being told what they can and can't do. And I'd just say one more thing, if I may. Yeah. You mentioned it there about the leaks in the run up to this. Now we've seen Lindsay Hoyle fuming at ministers in the past about announcing policy outside of the House of Parliament. In the run-up to this, the amount of leaks, briefs, stand-downs, even announcements before it's even budget day. If I was him, I don't know how it works, but if he's Speaker later and he gets up to introduce the Chancellor, I'd say, by the way, when this is finished, I'm resigning because I've had enough of that as well.
You've sounded very aggressive towards, if you don't mind me saying, she's had a difficult job to do today with the OBR situation. I think she's done a pretty good job.
You're mad.
Well,
you're mad. I'm sorry. By the way, the OBR accidental pressing of publish on their website. Yes, it's difficult. Yes, it's unheard of. It's not that much of a problem. She's sitting in the chamber. She will stand up and deliver the speech. People knew it 10 minutes before she did it. But in the grand scheme of things, so what? The difficult position is one of her, in part, of her own making.
Well, if you go back a bit further, Tom, and I know your Tory roots. It is 14 years, and I agree when people say, well, at some stage, the Labour Party needs to stop going back about the 14 years, but it still exists.
I agree with you. By the way, John, I totally agree with you. And the last government, the Conservative government, left a £20 billion black hole in the public fund accounts because they said they were going to cut lots of areas of the public sector in order to generate the tax cuts that they wanted to do. But John, the real gaslighting, if I'm going to use a sort of modern day term, the real gaslighting was Labour at the last election saying, don't worry about that, no need to worry about that, we will grow the economy sufficiently to get out of it, or we just won't do it. And they when pushed about, well, you're going to have to raise taxes then. No, we're not going to do that either. And here we are, budget number 2. We've got another enormous increase in taxes with the all the sort of the left-wing think tanks saying this isn't going to increase living standards, with no growth on the horizon at all that the OBR can lay their hands on. This is not. If this is a good job, I'd hate to see a bad job.
But Tom, they've not increased the taxes. They've unfrozen the threshold.
Are you working in Treasury comms, sir?
Right. Tom, it's being realistic about the situation that you're in. The markets have reacted positively. I'm over here in Spain, and the pound's strengthened. Mm-hmm. The stock market is.
Everything carries on, yes. And the question is not just what it's doing, it's why is it doing it? Why is the market reacting the way it is? Why is it not going haywire?
Well, you tell me.
Because for 2 reasons. One, because she's put in a buffer that is now almost three times what she'd put in last time. 21 billion plays 9 billion. That's a lot. So the bond market in particular can have some confidence that she's not going to need to come back for more because there's a war chest there. But John, that impacts on me, my listeners, you, because you're paying for it.
As a sort of small business owner as well, what are the big costs? Because I imagine with this, it's fuel. How worried are you about, for instance, possible rise in fuel duty?
Any increase is a worry. As I mentioned to you earlier, we have, £30 it's costing us before we take the minibus out through ULEZ and congestion charge. And that's going to be rising. It's not going to get any less. And whatever new rules and regulations the government bring in about using your minibus, I'm trying to get. I mean, the road is our vinyl, and if we start getting charged silly money to use the roads, it's going to have a massive impact on our business unless
we have a dispensation.
Yeah. Paul isn't just facing problems with his tour bus. Chancellor Rachel Reeves is weighing up plans for a new council tax surcharge targeting high-value properties across England. Paul's borough could be the worst affected by these changes, and after showing us some of his skills with the guitar, we sat down with him at his home in Richmond to discuss his concerns about the potential increase.
Council, for instance, council tax is a huge issue. It might well be going up in wealthy areas. Have you thought about your own property? What would happen if that goes up?
Any increase in cost is a concern, because I'm basically living hand to mouth now. I have coming in what I spend. The idea of saving is just, it's not there.